So YouTube, in my first actual video, as opposed to any of that animated stuff I did before, I talked about how I was going to talk again about compromise. You see, we have this fetish about compromise in our politics, and it's summed up by this lovely chestnut. In the United States, we have the stupid party and the evil party. Usually when the stupid party's in power, it passes stupid legislation. When the evil party's in power, it passes evil legislation. But occasionally, they get together and we get something that's stupid and evil. That's a little bit of the nature of political compromise in this country. And, compromise is great. You're a little kid. You're told, hey, share your toys with little Johnny. He doesn't have as many toys as you do. Share your toys with little Johnny because, you have more toys than he does. Now, I'm not saying sharing's bad. I'm not saying compromise is bad. But compromise must come from a fundamental starting point of value. Little Johnny doesn't have a whole lot of toys. So I'm being nice and giving some of my toys to little Johnny to play with. That's a compromise. That's expressing a value to me and a value to little Johnny. Now, the teacher's saying, hey, I'm taking your toys and giving them to little Johnny. That doesn't express a value to me. That does maybe express a value to little Johnny, but little Johnny, he might not like it either. He might have an inherent sense that it's unfair. This is what we would call a stupid and evil compromise. So let's go in with some of the things that happened recently that the president didn't compromise on. Healthcare reform. So, okay, if you believe, as I do, that the government has promised too much and they can't afford to pay their promises, government couldn't afford to pay the promises and they probably knew it at the time they made those promises. Why should we make another large-scale promise that we're not going to be able to pay? That seems kind of evil. So you don't make a compromise with that. That's nuts. Also, let's say you think, well, if government moves its power in a little further into your inner circle and says, okay, I can dictate you my health insurance. When companies that now provide health insurance have all sorts of new powers about saying, okay, we can weigh you in, we can fire you if you smoke cigarettes, we can do all these sorts of things that affect our costs. This is a gateway to providing more government power over the lives of individuals. So if you believe that, as I do, then you're not going to be able to make a compromise that would do that. It's outside of the possible realm of compromise. Now, we could talk about, okay, we could jigger with health savings accounts. That's a way to achieve compromise on the underlying goal of getting more people covered with health insurance. We could debate whether that's something we need to do another time, but that's a form of compromise that expresses value to both parties. Well, it should express value to both parties, but doesn't necessarily do so. So, that's my issue with the fetish for compromise. You can make a compromise, but it has to be based off of value. So if Party A is backed by public employee unions, Party A can't have a value compromise that says, okay, we're going to cut off the really great deal that public employees get. Now, it's a really great deal when compared to private employees, because private employees, their employers had to deal with a little thing we like to call reality. And in reality, when you can't pay your bills, you have two choices. Do less things or go broke. It's a little harder for governments to go broke and collapse. It does happen, but it's rare. So, again, if Party A is in that situation, they can't compromise. It's impossible for them to do so. The public employee unions give them a lot of money. So they're going to go out of business because, again, this is more of a private enterprise kind of transaction if they do what may be, arguably, the best thing to do for everybody. You flip that around. You got Republicans. They have a lot of people with money and investments in business who are saying, hey, we don't need more taxes. That'll make it harder for us to do things. We could argue that that's not a valid position. We'll pretend for the moment that's not a valid position. So, okay, if the Republicans don't do that, if the Republicans go out and, say, well, we're going to tax you, sorry, we need the money, then the Republicans lose that support and they become weaker as a party. Compromise in that situation is impossible if you're using that inside-the-box strategy on either side. So, you have to figure out a way to make decisions that benefit the country that have a value position in which compromise is possible. So, in response to the issue of political compromise versus political ideology, you cannot make a compromise if you get nothing in return. You cannot make a compromise if you have nothing to provide the other side in return that will be of value to them. That's the nature of compromise. So, when the president sits around the table and tells people, well, you can't bring your ideas to the table because I won and I dictate what the compromise is, that's not compromise. That's dictating. So anyway, this is why I'm not a big fan of other fetish terms like bipartisanship, because it again creates a presumption that if we do half of what Party A wants and half of what Party B wants, everyone will be happy. Now, of course, the media does a very good job of presenting that storyline, and the politicians who, again, in a more free market exchange strategy, they need to get votes from people who believe that, so they do a good job of pitching that. So that's why I'm not a big fan of political compromise, because real political compromise rarely exists.